I'm Nathan Rutherford, and welcome to Myth Madness. Last episode, I continued with Apollonius of Rhodes' account of the adventure of Jason and the Argonauts. Jason had been tasked by his uncle Pelias to retrieve the Golden Fleece, and Jason had assembled a crew of heroes and commandeered a great ship called the Argo to do just that. The heroes finally arrived at the land of Colchis, the location where, many years before, a golden ram carried a young boy to safety. That land was ruled by a powerful magician and son of Helios named Aeetes, and the fleece of the golden ram was in his possession. When Jason asked the king if he could be given the fleece to take back to Greece, Aeetes challenged him with yoking 2 fire-breathing bulls to a plow, using that plow to plant dragon's teeth and then fight to death the beings that grew out of the ground. This activity was apparently something the immortal Aeetes did regularly to pass the time. But for the human Jason, it should have proved to be an impossible and lethal task. Fortunately for Jason, the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite tried to ensure his success. They caused one of the daughters of Aeetes, a young woman named Medea, to fall in love with Jason. Driven by these feelings, she used her own magic powers to prepare a special potion for him. The potion made Jason temporarily invulnerable, and he completed Aeetes' challenge. When Aeetes tried to betray Jason, Medea snuck out in the middle of the night, warned the hero, and led him to where the Golden Fleece was kept. She charmed its serpent guardian to sleep, and then joined the Argonauts as they prepared their ship to escape with the treasure. While the heroes in their ship cast off, Aeetes and the Colchians were learning what Medea had done. They armed themselves, and in a frenzy rushed along the banks of the river. Aeetes rode in his chariot, pulled by horses gifted by his father Helios. In one hand he held a shield, and in the other a torch. When they got to the banks, they found the Argo already gone, already sailing downstream and cleaving through the sea thanks to the strength of its heroic oarsmen. Swift winds blew due to the actions of Hera. She wanted to be sure Medea would return to Greece and work the goddess's vengeance on the cruel king Pelias. But Aeetes would not be stopped so simply. His men launched their ships in pursuit of the Argo. The Colchians didn't know which way the Argo went, so they divided into 2 groups to cut off their escape. One group sailed across the Black Sea and through the clashing rocks. This was the way the Argo first came to Colchis, and was the way that they were thought to take back. But the other fleet, commanded by Medea's brother Absyrtus, cleverly went in a different direction. They went along the north side of the Black Sea, towards the mouth of the Ister River, which is called the Danube today, and this was actually the way the Argo was now using to try and escape. Eventually, Absyrtus caught up and cornered them. A grim fight could have happened, but instead they entered into talks. It was agreed that since Aeetes did promise the Golden Fleece if Jason fulfilled the contest, they could keep it, as it was justly won. But that left what was to happen to Medea. A deal was struck. The heroes would be allowed to leave, but Medea was to be left as a ward in the nearby Temple of Artemis. There, she would stay until a local king, acting as a judge, determined if she should return to her father or follow after the Argonauts to Greece. When Medea heard this, she pulled Jason aside. Her voice broke with sobs as she asked him if he had forgotten his promise to marry her. She said she was ready to follow him to Greece, and told him to be ready to stand by her to the end, and not abandon her. If he did plan to abandon her and break his oath, may he be racked with guilt. May the fleece vanish into the underworld on the wings of the wind. May the Furies drive him from his country. To calm her, Jason told Medea the deal did not please him, but that they had no choice. The heroes did not want a battle. They were surrounded by enemies, and any battle would surely end with them dead and Medea taken like a captured prisoner. He told her the deal was an attempt at deceit, which would hopefully lead her brother to ruin. Medea responded that she would help. She would trick Absyrtus into coming to see Jason so he could be killed. Deviously, the two of them prepared gifts for Jason to send to Absyrtus, and separately, Medea convinced her brother, through secret messages, to meet her at the temple of Artemis at night so she could steal back the Golden Fleece and come back with him to Colchis. She told her brother she never wanted to go with the Greeks, but had been kidnapped, against her will, by the sons of Phrixus. Of course, it was all an elaborate ruse. Jason lay in ambush nearby. As Medea distracted Absyrtus, Jason leapt out of his hiding place, lifted his sword, and struck Absyrtus down, all while Medea turned away to avoid seeing the blood of her brother spilled on the ground. Then, on a signal from Medea, the rest of the Argonauts attacked the remaining Colchians. Leaderless, they did not stand a chance, and while it was still night, the Argo escaped. But when the surviving Colchians realized their prince was murdered, they eagerly pursued. Fortunately for the Argonauts, Hera slowed the Colchian ships down with fiery bolts of lightning sent from the sky. The Argo escaped. Not wanting to go back and admit failure to the cruel king Aeetes, the Colchians decided not to go home, but to resettle around the coast of the Black Sea. This Murder of Absyrtus is the version in Apollonius's Argonautica. A very similar murder occurs in the notes of the Roman Hyginus, but the location is different. Another different, but no less gruesome version is recorded by Apollodorus in his library. Apollodorus has Medea accompanied by her brother Absyrtus when she flees Colchis with the Argonauts. In this version, it's implied Absyrtus is much younger than her, which is an interesting take, as in most versions, Absyrtus is a strapping young man, strong like his father, radiant like Helios, and intent on leading the fleet sent to retrieve Medea. But in Apollodorus' version, the fleet is led by Aeetes himself. What happens is, when the Aeetes-led fleet began to close in on the Argo, Medea and Jason killed the young Absyrtus. Medea cut up his body, and then threw the severed limbs into the ocean, where they floated directly into the path of Aeetes' ship. The king stopped to gather up the pieces of his dead son, because he needed to give his son a proper Greek burial. This gave the Argo time to get away. Either way, Absyrtus is murdered. His cruel and unnecessary death greatly angered Zeus, king of the gods. He decreed that the Argonauts should cleanse themselves of the killing, and should suffer greatly before their return to Greece. None of the heroes knew this, however. After escaping the Colchians, the Argonauts' return voyage is fairly convoluted. They travel up the Danube River, they pass through various European lakes, until they return to the Mediterranean, a path which I'm pretty sure is actually impossible. They then pass various islands. At one point, Hera, following the decrees of Zeus, stirred up storm winds, and then whisked the heroes further away from home. Finally, the beam at the center of the ship spoke to the heroes. It told them about Zeus's wrath, and that they would not escape storms, and would continue on an endless sea voyage, unless the witch Circe purified them of the murder of Absyrtus. Polydeuces and Castor were instructed to pray, so while the other Argonauts sat upset, the twins rose and prayed with all their hearts to the immortal gods. Prayed like they had never prayed before. This seemingly got the ship through the storms, and eventually they arrived at an island called Aiaia. On the island's beach, they found Circe bathing her head in the salty sea spray. She made a frightening figure. The witch glowed with flame, and wild animals followed behind her. The heroes gazed at her with wonder, and they guessed correctly that she was the sister of Aeetes of Colchis. Circe told the heroes to come with her, waving them onwards. Jason told them to stay where they were, while he and Medea followed on alone. When they reached the woman's home, Circe sat them in chairs by the hall's fireplace. Medea hid her face with her hands, while Jason took the sword he used to slay Aeetes' son and fixed it standing in the ground. The two of them did not meet Circe's eyes. She instantly realized that they were guilty of murder, and had come to seek purification according to the will of Zeus. So Circe began the necessary sacrifices and rituals. First, over their heads she held the body of a mother pig. She slit its throat and sprinkled its blood on their hands. Circe poured out drinks and called on Zeus, the cleanser. She burnt cakes and made special prayers to keep Jason and Medea safe from the terrible, crime-avenging goddesses, the Furies. Circe asked them about their voyage and why they needed to come to her home. When Medea raised her eyes from the ground, Circe recognized she was a relative, since all the descendants of Helios have flashing golden eyes. Medea told her everything, but stopped short at the murder of Absyrtus. But Circe wasn't tricked. The witch told them they could not avoid her brother Aeetes for long. He would likely follow them all the way to Greece to avenge his son. She then kicked them out of her house, saying she wouldn't hurt them since they had come for purification, but she didn't want Medea and her mysterious companion around, so shameful was their crime. Medea began to cry, until Jason grabbed her hand and led her out of Circe's hall. As they left and began to make their way back to the Argo, the goddess Iris, messenger of the gods, watched them go. She quickly disappeared and told Hera what she'd seen. Hera then told Iris to go to the sea and tell the powerful nymph Thetis to come meet her on Mount Olympus. Iris left, and Hera waited. When Thetis arrived, Hera sat her in a chair next to her throne. She turned to the nymph. "Thetis, when you were a baby, I tended you with my own hands, and I love you more than any of the other dwellers of the sea, because you refused to share Zeus's bed when he desired you. Zeus gave you up, but I gave you the best of the sons of earth to be your husband and give you a son. You know how honored in my heart Jason and the Argonauts are. But they are approaching danger. If you prevent the Argo from being destroyed at sea, when your son passes to the underworld, he will be the husband of Medea." Thetis agreed to Hera's deal and returned to the sea. She found the Argo at an island. The men were on the beach playing games of archery. Invisible, she moved in close, until she brushed the hand of her husband, the Argonaut Peleus. Remaining invisible to everyone else, she told him the Argonauts must leave the beach immediately and sail for the Planctae, the Wandering Rocks. She told him by the orders of Hera, her sisters would join up to guide them past the danger. And with that, she vanished into the depths, not particularly liking her mortal husband. Peleus was amazed at the sudden appearance of his wife, who he had not seen in many years. He told the Argonauts it was time to continue with their journey. The next place they came to was the island of the Sirens. The Sirens were half bird and half girl, and used their songs to tempt whoever sailed by and so destroy them on the hidden rocks below the waves. Before the Sirens spent their days on an island drowning unlucky sailors, they were the companions of the goddess Persephone, before she was married to the underworld king Hades. As the Argo approached, the Sirens began their song. The crew was almost overcome, but the hero Orpheus pulled out his lyre and began filling their ears with his own melody. The heroes were saved, except for one, Butes, who jumped off the boat and landed in the sea before Orpheus could stop him. Next, the Argo reached a point where the heroes needed to make a dangerous choice. They could go one way and try to avoid the monster Scylla and the huge whirlpool Charybdis, or they could pass between the Wandering Rocks. The Wandering Rocks are very similar to the clashing rocks the Argonauts faced on their journey to Colchis. The Wandering Rocks were a series of islands, not connected to the sea floor. They randomly moved around and crushed ships between them. Fortunately, Thetis and her nymph sisters were waiting. Peleus directed the Argo to go for the Wandering Rocks, and the nymphs safely guided the ship around the islands, just how Thetis had told Peleus before. Afterwards, the Argo reached the island of the Phaeacians. This group of people were descended from the Gigantes, the tribe of arrogant giants who fought a war against the gods. The Phaeacians were ruled by a king named Alcinous, who welcomed the Argonauts. The only problem was, the second fleet of Aeetes' Colchians had also stopped there, and they were very keen to take Medea back to her father. The Argonauts armed themselves and prepared to fight the Colchians. Medea encouraged them by pointing out that she was the only reason they were returning home, and had not already died in Colchis. Alcinous didn't want his visitors to create chaos on the island. He offered to mediate to keep the peace. Medea begged his wife and queen, Arete, for help. She approached her husband to learn his thoughts. Alcinous told Arete he wanted to show grace to Medea, but feared the judgment of Zeus and the power of Aeetes. Aeetes here is treated as a great king, who could bring war to Greece even though he is far away. Alcinous told Arete that if Medea is still a virgin, he would send her back to her father, but if she had shared a husband's bed with Jason, he wouldn't separate them. Now, previously, when Medea was begging Arete for help, she had told the queen, "My maiden's girdle remains, as in the halls of my father, unstained and untouched." Arete knew Medea was a virgin. Arete waited until Alcinous fell asleep, and then sent out a message. Giving away Alcinous's plan, she urged Jason to marry Medea as soon as possible. That same night, as soon as the heroes heard, they prepared to marry Jason and Medea. Sheep were sacrificed. A bridal couch was placed in a sacred cave, and the Golden Fleece itself was laid out on top of it. The Argonauts grabbed their spears and sang songs at the cave door. So even though Jason originally wanted to marry Medea in his father's house upon returning home, he married Medea in a cave on the island of the Phaeacians. To consummate the marriage, Medea and Jason had sex on top of the fleece they stole from Medea's father. It's one dramatic detail on the part of Apollonius. Later, on learning of their marriage, although probably not exactly when it happened, Alcinous declared Medea was to go with her husband. The Colchian fleet, not wanting to return empty-handed to Aeetes, decided to stay with the Phaeacians. The Argonauts left. Before going, Alcinous gave them gifts, and Arete gave Medea 12 handmaidens to serve her. Soon after, once again, the Argo got stuck in a storm and was blown off course, eventually arriving at the coast of Africa. The powerful tide actually pulled the ship onto the land, and then left the Argo stranded out of the sea. There was no water, and no way to get back to the water, and Caius, the driver of the ship, told the heroes there was no escape from certain ruin. The Argonauts panic. By the time evening came, they had accepted their destruction, and all lay down to sleep. In the middle of the night, Jason lay huddling on the ground. His blankets were slowly pulled away, and a foot nudged him in the stomach until he woke up. When Jason opened his eyes, he found 3 dark figures, 3 nymphs wrapped in goatskins, staring down at him. They basically told him to get off his sorry butt and get cracking. They gave him a riddle: to wake the Argonauts and treat their mother well for carrying them so long in her womb. Jason didn't know what that meant, but once he woke his comrades, Peleus cleverly solved the riddle. The goddesses were telling them to band together and carry the Argo across the desert. It's a bit of a crazy solution, but they did just that, carrying the Argo for a full 12 days, until they arrived at the fabulous garden of the Hesperides and a large lake. And what they found there was a scene of complete chaos. The garden's serpent guardian lay dead, already killed by Heracles' poison-tipped arrows. Flies buzzed through the air, and great piles of dead ones lay on the ground. These dead flies had landed on the corpse of the serpent, and were then poisoned by the hydra venom-laced blood that pooled in the serpent's wounds. The Hesperides nymphs, their pale arms flung over their golden-haired heads, cried, moaned, and wandered aimlessly. If the heroes got too close, the nymphs turned to dust and collapsed where they stood. The remaining nymphs told Orpheus that it was only the day before that Heracles showed up, clad in his lion skin, eyes flashing, bringing destruction, and made off with the golden apples that grew in the garden. The heroes pushed the Argo into the nearby lake. The Argonaut soothsayer Mopsus was bitten by a poisonous snake hiding in the grass and died. The water spirit, Triton, emerged from the lake to see what was going on. The heroes traded him a gold tripod for him to tell them how to get back to the sea from the lake. Following his instructions, the Argonauts returned to the open sea, and the Argo cruised to its next stop in Crete. And there they ran into Talos. Talos is an interesting character in Greek mythology. Today, he is often imagined as a huge metal man, but there are several issues with that depiction, mostly because the ancient Greeks imagined him in a handful of different ways. Apollodorus' library gives a quick summary of 3 of these versions. Version 1 is that Talos is a survivor of the bronze race of men. This was the race of humans made from ash trees that I talked about way back in episode 1 of the podcast. Version 2 is that Talos was literally a man made from bronze. He's an enchanted metal statue. Version 3 is like version 2, but Talos is not a man, he's a bull. The Talos in Apollonius' Argonautica is essentially a combination of Apollodorus' versions 1 and 2. This Talos did belong to the previous race of human beings, but was also made of metal. It seems that by the Hellenistic period, when Apollonius was writing the Argonautica, there was a shift in how some Greeks imagined the earlier races. Instead of being a metaphor for social decline, the bronze race was seen as actually being made of bronze. Apollonius' Talos is a huge bronze man. He was put on Crete to protect the woman Eurypa when she was brought there by Zeus many years ago. Apollonius says he was a bronze race survivor, but Apollodorus, who has a similar role for Talos, also says he was made by Hephaestus. Talos patrolled the island and ran around it 3 times every day. When he saw the Argo approach, he threw huge boulders at the ship. In the Argonautica, the heroes put Medea ashore to deal with the bronze man. She put a spell on Talos, so that while he was lifting more heavy rocks, he cut his ankle on a sharp piece of stone, and then bled to death. Apollodorus' library actually contains a slightly more interesting showdown between the two. Talos was kept alive by a single blood vessel that ran from his head to his ankle. Medea was able to get close to him, and removed a pin that kept this vessel sealed. His blood drained out, and he died. The versions are slightly different, but they end with Talos dying in the same way, bleeding out of his ankle. After leaving Crete, the Argonauts stopped at one last island. After all the hardships and trials, this final island was a relaxing break. They laughed and played games. They held races, and they carried great vases on their shoulders. Together, they held one last sacrifice to Apollo. And with that, Apollonius ends his poem with the words, "Be gracious, blessed princes. May these songs year after year be sweeter to sing among men. For now have I come to the glorious end of your toils, for no more adventure befell you on your way home." Of course, the Argonauts continued on to Iolcos, although for whatever reason Apollonius decided not to include a scene where Jason returned victorious, carrying the Golden Fleece with arms stretched above his head. And then what happened? There's no word on what happened to the Golden Fleece. Did Jason hand it over to his uncle Pelias? Was it hung in a temple? Or was it given to the gods like the golden apples Heracles retrieved? What do you think? Before I end this episode, I want to discuss some differences between Apollonius' version of the story and some references to the voyage from earlier in Greek history. The oldest mention of the Argonauts' voyage is in Homer's Odyssey. It mentions the Argonauts' choice to brave the wandering rocks on their return voyage instead of taking their chances with Scylla and Charybdis. Not much else appears in Homer's poems. The Iliad shares the detail that Jason did have a son with Hypsipyle on the Island of Women, and that son went on to participate in the Trojan War. On Medea, in the Argonautica, she is a critical figure who ensures Jason's success at several points. The power of love is put front and center by Apollonius, and this fits with the artistic desires of Hellenistic Greeks during the 3rd century BC. However, the link between Medea and the Golden Fleece adventurer goes back to at least the 7th century BC. In lines by the poet Mimnermus, it is said that Jason would not have succeeded without her help. The placement of this in a poem where Mimnermus talks about love and relationships strongly implies the her here refers to Medea. However, it is possible, though not as likely, that it refers to help provided by Hera or Athena. Indeed, in general, the help of these goddesses cannot be ignored. There are many examples of Hera doing so in Apollonius's Argonautica. But Athena was also important too. A decorated dish made around 475 BC shows a large, fierce-looking serpent head, throwing up an unconscious Jason. Athena stands to the right, watching, while the fleece hangs on a tree in the background. Does this picture refer to a version of the story where Jason is eaten and Athena rescues him before he escapes with the fleece? Nothing like that is found in the Argonautica. And that brings me to one final point. You likely noticed over the course of my retelling just how useless the Argonaut heroes sometimes are. They are very emotional. They get easily depressed, lose hope quickly, and only move forward after being motivated by either Medea or Peleus. It's not very heroic. In fact, Apollonius likely did some of this on purpose, playing these characteristics up as part of a move away from the highly competent yet incredibly bloodthirsty heroes of the Archaic period to a more romantic-style, Hellenistic hero. Yet, even then, Jason, although he is the leader, doesn't seem very talented next to some of the others. The other Argonauts include seers, trained warriors, fast runners, and a shapeshifter. In part 1, I mentioned how in the centuries before Apollonius, there were probably versions of the Argonautica adventure where each different crew member used their unique special power to push the heroes forward, just like how the sons of Boreas saved Phineus from the Harpies. In the Argonautica, Jason's power is his extraordinary good looks. It's a power that's hard to imagine a more traditional Homeric-style epic hero as having. So what could the Archaic period Jason's special power or talent have been if all of the Argonauts had one? We have some strong hints. The first hint hides in plain sight. Jason's name, Iason in Greek, literally means healer. This is backed up by the second hint, which comes from what Jason was doing before starting his quest. A young Jason was sent to live with the centaur sage Chiron, who raised the hero to adulthood. As I mentioned in the Chiron episode, the centaur was very knowledgeable in medicine. His name is linked to surgery, and he taught medicine and healing to many of his young hero pupils. When Jason first began the quest for the Golden Fleece, he was a hero skilled in the arts and sciences of healing other heroes. That obviously makes him a very important person in a group of people who travel far and wide will face a series of dangerous physical threats. So Jason wasn't just the leader of the Argonauts, or the pretty boy of the Argonauts. He was the Argo's medic. And that's all for today, and brings to an end my retelling of the adventure of the Golden Fleece. I made these past 4 episodes a little differently, with the bulk of the episodes focused more on the storytelling, and a little less on the analysis. That was mostly on purpose, as I'm trying to find ways to make these myths come alive to listeners, and it was helped by the fact that we have a fairly long poem that covers the story. If you liked what I did here, with Jason and the Argonauts, please send me a comment at www.mythmadness.com, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. If you're enjoying the whole pod, please send it to a friend who would enjoy it too. As always, a big thank you goes out to all the listeners.